vast landscape of New Mexico has seen a long and varied history. It has seen the development of our nation and its people in a way few other states have. Welcome to a new series designed to explore, investigate, and celebrate the people, places, and stories that create our unique New Mexican identity. For the next half hour, we'll share with you the story of travel throughout the land of enchantment, where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. Welcome to Legendary New Mexico.
Legendary New Mexico, in partnership with TLC Plumbing and Utility.
Francisco Vázquez de Coronado, along with hundreds of Spanish explorers, made their way up the El Camino Real in the 1540s, searching for the fabled cities of gold. The road served to connect Central to North America until the 19th century. In 1821, William Becknell developed a new trade route that ran from Santa Fe to Independence, Missouri, known as the Santa Fe Trail. The route was then succeeded by the development of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe rail systems, which brought travel and commerce through the land of enchantment like never before. The birth of the 20th century ushered in the age of the automobile, expanding the travel opportunities for residents and visitors alike, and linking the rural to the urban in record time. Wagon and burro trails were developed into roads and highways. In the 1930s, the historic Route 66 brought mass transit to New Mexico, and a sense of endless adventure and opportunity. As America emerged from World War II, the interstate system streamlined travel and linked the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. Transportation grew faster with the advent of the aviation industry, which helped develop Albuquerque through Kirtland Air Force Base and the Albuquerque International Sunport. From the Sunport to the Spaceport in southern New Mexico, the transportation industry continues to grow through the 21st century, yet again making New Mexico a crossroads for discovery, just as it was when Coronado first set foot on our soil. Spanning 1,200 miles and covering 5 states, the Santa Fe Trail was not only responsible for bringing in trade and people to New Mexico and the West, but for setting the groundwork for the mass transit we utilize today.
From 1821 until 1880, some of America's biggest adventure seekers set out from Franklin, Missouri, and not only helped settle the western half of the United States, but faced battles of war, disease, and death along the way, all while bringing trade and civilization to parts unknown, and forging a path we still use in one form or another today. This is the Santa Fe Trail.
Just the story of the trail itself, and then what happened in 1847, and then the Civil War, which occurred in small scale here, the dealing with the native peoples, the various Indian tribes, which has always fascinated people. It brought Billy the Kid here, and he's the most famous character in New Mexico history.
The trail itself achieved its own fame along the way in New Mexico, with Civil War battles occurring along its route at places like Glorieta and Fort Union. This was a military fort which not only protected the trail and housed soldiers, but had the largest hospital between Kansas and California. They not only treated wounded soldiers, but tradesmen injured along the Santa Fe Trail.
You didn't come in the winter because it can get really nasty out there on the plains. You had a limited time to get here. One part of the trail, one route, went across the Cimarron Crossing, the dry Cimarron Crossing. You had the problem of not being able to find water always.
And here's where the two paths of the Santa Fe Trail came back together in Watrous, New Mexico. From here it went all the way to the end of the line at the Santa Fe Plaza, following the path of what is pretty much today Interstate 25.
Because the railroad and then the highways later followed it, not the exact same path, but the trail wasn't necessarily just one set of ruts either. They follow that from here back to the east, to the north.
But the trail didn't just provide trade between Mexico and the United States. It also provided the introduction of different cultures. This included Anglo tradesmen like my fourth great-grandfather, William Richard Taylor, and mixing with early Spanish settlers of the area. More importantly, the trail brought us some of the essential elements of current living.
We have light bulbs, electricity, plumbing, with pipes. We have good water systems. We have indoor toilets. We wound up with tin roofs on many of the houses.
Despite all these advancements New Mexico had made from resources brought in on the trail, the invention of the railroad as a safer and much faster way of bringing in goods and people to the state put an end to the Santa Fe Trail. But for historians like Robert Hill and groups like the Santa Fe Trail Association, the memory and purpose of the trail live on.
If you don't know who you are and where you came from, you're sort of lost as an individual and as a part of a group.
David Romero, Legendary New Mexico.
When Legendary New Mexico continues, see how one local man's journey to the beyond impacted space travel today. Legendary New Mexico, in partnership with TLC Plumbing and Utility.
Space travel is a big part of New Mexico's transportation heritage. Our state is not only home to one of the men who walked on the moon, Harrison Schmitt, but also several space shuttle astronauts. Some even say New Mexico was visited by aliens back in 1947. Our pilot reporter Bob Martin takes us on a journey along the legendary Space Trail.
Near Roswell, the 1930s, Robert Goddard, who earlier launched the world's first liquid-fueled rocket back east, the kind needed to send people to space, is flying more.
The first one to fly a liquid fuel rocket, first one to develop an internal guidance system. His designs are the designs we still use today. And at the time he started it, he's the only one in the world doing the research.
Goddard's workshop is recreated in the Roswell Museum and Art Center. A few years after he last used this hardware, and across the state at White Sands Proving Grounds, German scientist Wernher von Braun continued development of V-2 rocket technology. What was learned here helped America start its space program.
The first launch into space here in America, White Sands Proving Ground. The first launch of animals into space. The first photographs taken of space.
The first astronaut candidates for our first manned spacecraft, Mercury, all men, were sent to New Mexico and the nation's top aeromedical facility, Loveless. The poking and testing endured here became astronaut lore. Loveless also tested women and recommended some who did as well or better than some of the men, but NASA declined. For our moonshots, New Mexico's White Sands Missile Range is one of the places where the Apollo capsule was tested. Capsules were launched on a rocket called the Little Joe 2. When one booster unexpectedly broke up, the escape system proved it could work perfectly, pulling the capsule away. You can see both a real Little Joe 2 and a V2 in person, very close to where they originally flew, here at the New Mexico Museum of Space History in Alamogordo. America's journey to the moon would also count on hundreds of New Mexicans working at NASA's White Sands Test Facility near Las Cruces.
They were testing the rocket engines that were utilized to land us on the moon.
Researchers and technicians here have since supported most of NASA's other missions. Nearby is New Mexico's first spaceport, White Sands Space Harbor. The shuttle Columbia landed here in '82. Beginning in 1993, White Sands also played host to tests of a futuristic Buck Rogers-looking military rocket called the Delta Clipper that could take off and land on its tail. The Delta Clipper program ended, but today, 2 new companies have revived landing and reusing boosters. Blue Origin is flying a prototype of a space tourism rocket over West Texas. It goes to space, the booster comes back and lands on its tail, goes back to space. Another company, SpaceX, is also landing its boosters launched from Florida on a barge at sea. SpaceX has also built a launch site in New Mexico to do more tests. That site is at Spaceport America, a new facility the state of New Mexico is now pinning its space future on. Between Truth or Consequences and Las Cruces, Spaceport America has already sent lots of unmanned rockets into space. Up Aerospace regularly flies experiments, memorabilia, even the ashes of folks who got to make their last journey a memorable one. But soon, coming to this exotic realm above New Mexico, living people, space tourists. Virgin Galactic plans to launch Spaceship Two here. Paying passengers will get about 4 minutes of weightlessness in space above New Mexico. Delayed by technical problems and a crash, Virgin hopes New Mexico Space Tourist Service will start in 2018.
They're building their second spacecraft out in Mojave. We're thrilled to have Virgin as an anchor tenant, but we always envision many, many other customers here.
Meanwhile, White Sands Missile Range is also back in line to land more manned spacecraft. The range is now one of the primary landing sites for Boeing's Starliner, one of our replacements for the space shuttle. Bob Martin for Legendary New Mexico.
Don't go away. When we come back, we're taking a trip down the Mother Road as we explore how Route 66 helped the growth of the Duke City economy. And a little later, we'll be taking a closer look as people stopped using the Santa Fe Trail and started jumping on the rails. All that and more when Legendary New Mexico returns. Legendary New Mexico, in partnership with TLC Plumbing and Utility.
Mid-century America was ripe with opportunity and discovery. As Americans moved west to find new opportunities and lives for themselves, one highway in particular became more than just an artery from the Midwest to the Pacific coast. It became a symbol of American independence and American style.
It's called the Mother Road. More than 2,400 miles of pavement linking the Windy City to the Gold Coast of America. And while today Route 66 is primarily a corridor for the adventurous and nostalgic, its birth was based in practicality.
It all started in 1916 with the Federal Aid Roads Act that was introduced in order to take a series of cobbled together trails and make them all into one national highway that would run almost all the way across the country from the area around Los Angeles up to Chicago.
The highway entered the state near Glen Rio, then traveled west past Santa Rosa, where it shot north toward Las Vegas. From there, it headed through Santa Fe, then traveled back down toward Albuquerque and Los Lunas, a trek that gave New Mexico the largest stretch of the road in the United States.
And here was all this land just ripe for development in Albuquerque.
As Nob Hill historian Gary Eister says, the route was streamlined in the late 1930s to cut straight through Albuquerque, bringing with it an explosion of development.
And after that, it was possible to get through New Mexico less than 500 miles. It was actually 399 miles.
The highway's path through Albuquerque brought dozens of businesses to the city. In 1937, Daniel Murphy left his post as manager of the Hotel Franciscan to open the El Vado Motel, located west of the Franciscan on what would become Central Avenue. It was one of many enterprises ready to give travelers their kicks along the 66.
A lot of the original parts of the Mother Road that ran north and south became secondary arteries. For example, 4th Street and Isleta Boulevard continued to flourish to a certain extent because those roads were still heavily traveled.
Shops like Kurt's Camera Corral, theaters like the Chemo, and cinemas like the Lobo Theater found huge success along the Mother Road. And many of those travelers found new careers as America entered the nuclear age.
Because a lot of people traveling down Route 66 were traveling west to find new careers, new jobs, and taking them to a different life, where oftentimes, especially coming through New Mexico, it took them into a nuclear field, whether it was Sandia National Labs or something else.
Albuquerque is a very special place along the route. There's no other place along Route 66 that's like us.
Unfortunately, progress sometimes comes with casualties. The National Interstate Highway System was introduced in 1957, chiming the death knell for the storied 66.
Dwight Eisenhower had seen the Autobahns in Germany, and he had used the Autobahns in Germany with his troops. And when he became president, he introduced the idea that we should have an Autobahn system here in the United States.
Interstates shifted traffic from arteries like Route 66 to 4-lane freeways. Over the next 2 decades, businesses suffered a slow demise. By 1970, the Hotel Franciscan had closed its doors, and 2 years later, it was demolished, replaced with an open parking space on 6th and Central. The Chemo Theater, once the grandest of theaters in the Southwest, fell into disrepair, and the once popular El Vado Motel suffered a similar fate, ultimately closing in 2005.
I think people are very sentimental about Route 66 in Albuquerque. We have good reason to. We are actually the longest urban stretch of the highway in the entire country. even if you consider Los Angeles.
People really still try to make the Route 66 area as vibrant as possible.
Developers and residents insistent on preserving mid-century American history are busy bringing new life to the 66. The Carlisle will open its doors in December of 2016, complete with living spaces, gardens, and a rooftop patio. Kurt's Camera Corral will also be repurposed to feature all-new shops and alfresco dining. And the El Vado? It too will celebrate a rebirth, with plans calling for a boutique motel, amphitheater, and food court.
We are very different from other Sunbelt cities, and one of those reasons is because we have great resources like UNM, like Route 66, the state fairgrounds, these really important businesses and tourist commodities along Route 66 that nobody else has. I think it's a drama and excitement that's not going to go away anytime soon.
The rhythm of the road, the romance of the journey. It's what makes New Mexico's part of Route 66 truly legendary.
The Santa Fe Trail laid the groundwork for travel and trade in New Mexico. But the once prosperous trail proved to be incredibly slow compared to a new form of transportation which was barreling through the nation's landscape, the railroad.
The railroad really opened New Mexico to the rest of the world.
It was 1878 when the railroad made its way into Raton Pass and in the borders of the New Mexico territory. Slowly but surely, the introduction of the train to the land of enchantment would help launch us into statehood.
The railroad brought people, it brought opportunity, and it provided a way for New Mexico to become a part of the United States.
As the railroad made its way further into the state, courtesy of the paths established before by the Santa Fe Trail, towns not only saw a flood of goods coming their way, but many towns also began to grow and take shape.
At its height, the railroad, there were almost 3,000 miles of rail in New Mexico, and over the period of time, about 100 companies have run railroads in New Mexico, a lot of them logging or mining or other smaller short lines.
With the railroad boom in full swing in New Mexico, it not only brought a lot of prosperity with it, but a lot of famous spots around the state, including the Fred Harvey hotels, one at the Alvarado train station in Albuquerque and the other, the Hotel Castañeda here in Las Vegas.
The Santa Fe Trail had provided some commerce back and forth, but when you're doing ox carts, ox wagons and mule-pulled wagons, it's slower, and there are things you can't move. You can't always move people. It takes a long time. With the railroad, all of a sudden, you could move almost anything. You could move it rapidly. You get things here. You move people back and forth. You move products back and forth. All of a sudden, New Mexico can be on the map.
One key New Mexico city almost missed out on the railroad boom, Santa Fe. Because the capital city was too high in elevation and off the path from Las Vegas to Albuquerque, it took a bond issue to lay tracks and lure the lucrative transportation into the city different.
It was very pivotal in the future of the city of Santa Fe, because what happened was when the train, when AT&SF came to Las Vegas, New Mexico, it became a boomtown. When it stopped in Albuquerque, Albuquerque became a boomtown. And Santa Fe was really left in the dust until it decided to pay for the spur line, which brought all this commerce and tourism up here.
As beneficial as the trains were to the state, time and progress brought in new forms of transportation like planes and automobiles, which continue to move people and goods at faster rates. But New Mexico may not be done with the railroad just yet. With many depending on commuter trains like the Rail Runner and Amtrak still carrying passengers into the state, its usefulness continues on.
I think movement of freight by rail is going to be continue to be a big deal, and New Mexico has a lot of produce. They have agricultural products, they have manufactured goods that are going to continue to move by rail, and we're going to continue to be a strategic crossroads for the railroads as they cross the country.
David Romero, legendary New Mexico.
Thank you for joining us this evening. I encourage you to explore our great state for yourself. There are hundreds of stories just waiting to be discovered, and tonight we're just scratching the surface. So be sure to join us for our next adventure on Legendary New Mexico.